Books on Tape presents The Long Goodbye by Patti Davis, read by Staci Snell. Prologue. When I was about 10 years old, my father and I drove out to the ranch my family owned throughout my childhood. It was a bright Saturday morning, and we turned off the Pacific Coast Highway onto the familiar mountainous road that would take us to the open land and undeveloped acres of Agoura. On the way out, we talked about his horse, Nancy D., and the foal she was about to have. It wasn't a planned pregnancy. An Appaloosa stallion who had been given to my father had broken through 2 fences to reach Nancy D. and had succeeded admirably. As soon as we drove into the barnyard of our ranch and saw Ray, who took care of the property for us, we knew something was horribly wrong. Tears streaked his face, his eyes were puffy from crying, and he stood in front of my father with his head down, unable to meet his eyes. Nancy D. had died during the night from a virus that no one could have known she had. There were no symptoms, no clues. It suddenly and quickly killed her and the colt inside her. I immediately burst into tears. Nancy D. was the first horse I ever sat on. When I was small, my father used to hold me on the saddle in front of him. When I got bigger, he would lift me onto her back and lead me around the ring. She was patient and steady, seeming to know that the small person on her back was young and inexperienced. When I looked up at my father that morning, against the deep blue of the sky, he wasn't crying. He was looking up into all that blue, and the expression on his face was sweet and soft, and a million miles away. "Why aren't you crying?" I asked him through my own tears. He put his hand on my shoulder and met my eyes. "Because," he said, "I'm thinking about all the wonderful times I had with her. We had some great years together." It was one of my first lessons about death, about looking past it, if only for a few moments, at all the life that went before, all the loveliness and the rich memories. Those are what sustain us, is the lesson my father was trying to impart. On the day he was dying, I whispered to my father, "You'll see Nancy D. again. The 2 of you will go on long rides just like you used to." I whispered it with the trust he always wanted me to have, that in the stillness of his soul he would hear me. In the days and weeks since he died, I've often found myself lingering on the image of us standing at the ranch on that bright Saturday morning, my father's eyes tilted up to the sky. His first response to death was to remember the beauty of the life that had passed. The memory comes when I find myself wondering, where are you? The larger question aside, I knew one place I would find my father was in the manuscript I had begun in April 1995 and had set aside, after a couple of 100 pages, in February 1997. I'd started writing it as a way to deal with the grief that slammed into me that spring, 6 months after my father announced to the world that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I don't know why so many months went by before I crumbled beneath a fate none of us could control. Grief has its own timetable. Maybe there is a mercy to it, a period of shock, numbness. We drift on with the knowledge that life has shifted dramatically, but we are unable to fully grab hold of what that means. In any event, April is when it happened. I began writing a kind of journal, in sleepless nights, in the quiet hush of dawn, sometimes in the back of taxis or at outdoor cafes along Columbus Avenue. I was living in New York, and the trees in Central Park were sprouting new leaves. Blossoms were appearing everywhere. The air was warm and billowy. So much new life was around me. Even my relationship with my mother was new. After many years of a chilly, dispiriting war, one that wounded my father terribly, we had come together lovingly, peacefully, and sadly, joined then in the hard journey of losing my father. It was a journey that my mother would call the long goodbye. When I finally realized I was writing a book, there seemed no more appropriate title. For almost 2 years, I navigated the pathways of a grief that was new and unfamiliar. I ricocheted between memories and fear, and a sorrow so vast I didn't know how it would ever be contained. I made a life for myself in New York. I got to know my mother, finally, as I never had before. I traveled back to California as often as I could to spend time with my father. And I wrote, feverishly and often, trying to make sense of the loss that was tugging at my family, that was claiming us and defining us. In how many ways would we lose my father? Who would he be after Alzheimer's cruel surgery? Who would we be after years of watching him be whittled away? During this time, my sister Maureen and I also reached past years of competitiveness and jealousy, mostly over our father, and learned how to be sisters. Our long-distance calls became frequent and affectionate. She had undergone surgery for melanoma and was on a year-long treatment of interferon. It ravaged her, made her ill and weak, too weak to travel from Sacramento, her home, to Los Angeles to see our father. I think she suffered more from that than from the cancer treatment. In February 1997, I put the manuscript aside. The tumult of my grief was starting to abate. I looked ahead and saw months, maybe years, of waiting for an ending that was inevitable. Alzheimer's disease locks all the doors and exits. There is no reprieve, no escape. Time becomes the enemy, and it seemed to stretch out in front of us like miles of fallow land. If I kept adding to the book I had committed myself to, I reasoned, I would end up with a tome of 1,000 pages, and much of it would be about the long stretches of waiting for things to get worse or end, with we, the loved ones, having nothing but helplessness at our fingertips. In the lexicon of the disease, it's called plateauing. People with Alzheimer's skate along some strangely level course, not markedly different from one day to the next. It can last for many months, but it's the thinnest of ice they are skating on. The change will come, the fall, the next phase. They will get worse if death doesn't claim them first. I moved back to Los Angeles in 1997, closer to my parents, closer to my father's leaving. Over the next 7 years, I wrote for magazines and newspapers, and occasionally wrote about what we were going through as a family. Postcards, that's how I think of them. I was increasingly aware of how much the world cared and wanted to know how my father was doing, how we were doing. Alzheimer's came out of the shadows during those years. People talked about it openly, without shame or embarrassment. So I wrote postcards when a particular holiday struck me and evoked memories, something many families are haunted by if Alzheimer's has invaded them. Or when some hairpin turn in our long goodbye begged to be recorded. During those years, the world of our family changed in some dramatic ways. Maureen was felled again by melanoma, but this time it was everywhere, racing through her body and conquering everything in its path. She was a valiant opponent, refusing to give up. She was in the John Wayne Cancer Ward at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica when our father fell and broke his hip in February 2001 and was rushed to the same hospital. Ron flew in from Seattle. We visited Maureen on one floor and our father on the other. Maureen was too ill to go down 3 flights and see the father she adored. My father probably wouldn't have recognized her even if she had been able to. My mother would now have to sleep in their bed alone. Her love, her partner for decades, would now have to sleep in a hospital bed. What was once his office would now be his bedroom. Nurses would have to tend to him, and we were told to expect his death in the next few months. None of us expected him to live for another 4 years, bedridden, with Alzheimer's as his captor. Maureen died on August 9th, 2001, at home in Sacramento, with her husband and daughter around her. Our family was growing smaller in so many ways. The following month, the entire world changed. September 11 destroyed more than 2 towers, even more than the thousands of lives that were lost on that terrible day. It destroyed faith and hope for the future. It killed something vital in all of us. It ripped at the fabric of life as we knew it and left us with a sense of dread that nothing could ever take away. My mother and I stood at my father's bedside and told him what had happened, even though he couldn't consciously absorb it. "Something awful happened to us," I whispered to him. "We're never going to be the same." I missed him more after.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?